Hi, my name is Shaquille Shaniqua Joy, and today I'm here for the Harman Kardon Inspired by Sound series with Marko Roth. We're going to talk a little bit more about sound and the dynamics between sound and moving images. But yeah, maybe you should introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Marko Roth. I'm a film director from Germany. I'm also a new member of an audiovisual sound project called Touring.
The last time we spoke, you told me that sound actually makes 50% of a project or a film, whatever you're working on. I'm really excited that you're here and that we're going to talk about music, sound, the dynamic between sound and moving images. How are you feeling?
I'm good. It's a little bit unusual for me because normally I'm on
Behind
the other
the
side.
Exactly.
Now I'm in front of the camera,
Yeah.
but I'm good.
Yeah, lovely. I'm actually curious to learn a little bit more about your fascination as a director. You told me that you're basically self-taught and that you learned a lot of things along the way, tried out different aspects within the industry and kind of came to the conclusion that directing is what you want to do, and you've been doing that for a while. What was that process like, and what drew you towards the field, but also directing specifically?
I think I'm from this generation where there was this one new camera, DSLR camera, which was also for filming and which was like a revolution back then. And it was quite, it was quite affordable for like a 15-year-old to get this camera and to shoot film on a very high level. So that kind of was my entry ticket into the whole industry. And back then, when I was 15, I started filming my private holidays. And I just annoyed all my friends. I asked them to do this and to stand there. And in the end, I did a little travel film about the trip. And that's how it all started. And then from there, it got bigger and bigger, and clients got involved, and the crews got bigger. And I kind of realized that back then I was doing everything by myself, right? I was doing the camera work, I was editing, I was organizing, producing it. And I just realized that there are other people better with camera, for example, or there are other people better in editing. And in the end, it was directing, which was left over. So I took that.
Yeah.
And now I'm stuck with directing. But I'm really, really happy that I have this experience of, or that I went through all those different jobs in the film industry, because now as a director, you kind of have to know, it's really good to know what's possible in the camera work, what's possible in the editing work. So I think I can really, I have a good feeling for my crew. So I hope I can tell them in an empathetic way how to do things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you go through these different positions within an industry, even if you just assist someone, like there's such a huge amount of things that you can learn that benefit you later in your career when you decide whatever position it is that you want to take, because the people that you work with, you understand their job in a way. Even if you're not an expert in it, you know what they need from you, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And especially back then when I started in the industry, I was really, really young. I think I was 21. And back then, sometimes people don't take you seriously. When you're 21 and you have an editor or a DOP who's like much older than you, they don't take you seriously. And then, especially then, it's really helpful to know what's possible and what's not possible.
Yeah.
To tell them, look, I know, don't play with me. I know how it works.
Is this something you also take into consideration now that when you work with younger talents, that you're like, actually, let me treat them right because I know how it feels to be on the other end?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I think it's very. I had a really good teacher, or had like really good people who brought me into the industry. They were all older than me, and I always told myself, if I at one point have the possibility to give something back or to help someone who's younger than me, I would really want to do that.
Yeah,
So,
that's lovely. The last time we were speaking, you were like, we were on Zoom and you were like somewhere in the mountains. There was snow, and I remember or I don't know if there was snow actually. That's how I pictured it in my head. Yeah, okay. And we were talking a little bit about like nature as something, and I feel like also from your Instagram and just a small conversation we had, I could see that nature is something that is important to you. Is that also where you go to find inspiration?
Yeah, most of the times. I mean, when I have to write a script, when I have to prepare a film project, like all the pre-production, I most of the time go to our little cabin in Austria, which is in the middle of a forest and in the middle of the snow when you go in winter. Yeah, and I mean, every creative has their own kind of way how to be creative or how to be creative best. And for me, it's definitely just going out, going for a walk, going through the forest, and walking, hiking. In winter, it's more like ski touring, but that's how my brain and how my creativity works in a way. And then I come back, and suddenly, sometimes it gets really annoying, like when you know you're in the middle of this beautiful nature, and then you have this spark, and you know if you don't write it down now, you will lose it.
Yeah.
So then I have to get out like a phone or like a pen or something and write it down, and then I can continue. But that's like my way, and I think the last 10 years I just figured it out how I work creatively the best.
Yeah. Do you? Sorry.
No, that's definitely in nature.
Yeah. Do you still like sometimes? Do you think that it will change over time? That you're going to find different ways, or do you think like this is just I found it? You know what I mean? I found the way that works for me.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't.
You never know, actually.
You never know. I think what will always help me is movement. Like somehow movement does it for me.
Yeah.
If it, what kind, I think doesn't matter. It's just like that I have to be a little bit in movement. I can't just sit somewhere and then be creative. That doesn't work.
And we've been, it's. I was also thinking like in relation to sound and like being in nature. It's like a very interesting experience, especially if you're at a place where there's not like many people around. There's an absence of sound, but it's also a sound. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that to me is very inspiring sometimes to have like, you can hear the animals, but like very in the background and just like, it's a sound of nothing, but it does something, right?
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I'm trying to meditate each day, like 20 minutes every morning. And when you meditate, you hear sound so much more because your eyes are closed.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of each meditation, you're trying to hear everything around you to then not be distracted by those sounds.
Yeah.
And every time for example, in nature, I realized how much little sounds I can hear compared when I'm in the city.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
And what I said at the beginning is also that you told me that sound also kind of like has a big impact on your work and like the projects that you work on and the short films or films in general. You said that it's like 50% of the job in a way. Can you tell me a bit more about the importance of sound within your work, but also what you meant by the 50% that you said?
Yeah. So I think for me as a film director, music is like 50% of what I do. Like 50% of my project is the music. And sometimes there is this question with what you want to start when you edit a film or when you create a film. Do you start with, okay, I'm going to lay down the images and we're going to prepare the edit and then we're going to see what kind of music fits to the edit? Or do you want to start with, I have a track, I have a sound in my head or in my ear, and from that sound I want to start the edit? And I think I'm definitely that kind of person who always starts with music and who always starts with sound. I mean, not all of my work has music, some of it also just has sound design. For me, the soundscape is so important. And like I said, it's 50%, sometimes it's even more of the film. You can create so many different emotions with music. You can support emotions, but you can also have like a tension that the images are telling something else than the music, right? So there are so many ways to play with. And I think the best results are when those two worlds are kind of coming together and when they are married together, when they're baked in. together. And if it's not like, that's why I love to start with the track in my head.
Yeah, and then like there's a dynamic that also in the way that you mentioned, they influence each other, right? It can be so. I watched a movie the other day, and I thought that the music was so off. Like I thought it didn't match the images that I was seeing, and then I talked to someone else, and he was like, "Yeah, but maybe that was intentional in the way that they wanted to like confuse you a little bit or something like that." So it's definitely true. I also thought when I was watching some of your work that. There's a lot of like real stories that you're kind of highlighting. It's not a lot of fiction that I saw. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I was wondering how you find the stories that you want to tell.
Yeah, good question. So most of my stories, I got inspired by traveling through life. I mean, I think just recently I figured out that filmmaking was or still is and hopefully will be an outlet of my personal emotions and my personal experiences of what I have experienced in life. I've traveled a lot, so that's why I've also came across a lot of really, really interesting people. For example, we did a film about Ali, who is this guy living in the desert in Oman, and we did a little documentary about Ella Saidi, who's a documentary photographer, filmmaker from London, and we basically just put them together.
Together, I saw it.
Where did you learn to make fires like this?
From my mom.
Every day in the desert?
Every day we use wood for cooking at home.
What are the most difficult things about being in the desert?
The desert is very rough and tough. I am very far away from my family.
The beginning and the end was scripted. Like we knew, okay, we have this spot in the desert at the bonfire where Ali lives, and we're gonna bring Alice and we're gonna film that. And in the end, we're gonna have this conversation at the bonfire. But everything in between, we stayed there for 2 weeks, was completely open. And there was the documentary approach, which we choose. And we just followed them around, how Ali showed her Oman, his country. So Ali, for example, I met 6 years ago when I was also traveling in Oman, and I met him and I literally had that conversation with him at that bonfire. So I knew, okay, this is so special, this guy. We have to come back to do a film project with him.
Yeah, but like you mentioned this project, but I also looked at like some other works like Hands of Sicily and Mask 19, and I thought it was really interesting, for instance, about both projects, but like in particular, like the Hands of Sicily short, is that I thought it was interesting how there's this beautiful dynamic between like a lot of expression with like obviously hands, but in general, like in both projects, like the facial expression and gestures, and then the sound, not just music, but also the background noise and like the sounds that kind of give you a feeling of, oh, I'm really there in a way. Can you tell me a bit more about that dynamic of like, not just music, but also sound in general within your work and moving images?
So I think, again, for me, sound, when I talk about sound, it's not only music, it's also sound design. And sound design can be artificial, that you support a movement of the camera, but sound design can also be that you just hear what's going on, like atmospherical sound. And for example, for Hands of Sicily, this atmospherical sound was so crucial. If you watch this film without that sound, without that this little sound of a hand going over this cheese and rubbing the salt into the cheese, if you wouldn't hear that, it wouldn't have the same feeling.
Yeah.
And I think, for example, for Hands of Sicily, it was like so important. Like I think 80% of the soundtrack is the atmospherical sound, and then 20% is maybe this piano track.
Yeah.
So to make a film very realistic, authentic, and to have that feeling that you're actually there, this sound design is so important.
Yeah.
And same there, like a lot of sound designers would maybe say, yeah, just record it, and then we're gonna fake the sound design. So they're gonna fake it later in the studio, and they're gonna get a cheese and they're gonna get a hand and they record it in the studio. But it's not the same. So what I'm always trying to do is that when I'm on set, that I always record the sound on set.
Ah, okay.
And sometimes that can be a hustle because, for example, Hands of Sicily is a film which we shot on analog film, like really old school. And this camera is like really loud. So you hear actually the film going through.
Yeah.
So
But I think it adds to the character.
Yeah, it adds a little bit to the character, but it was a little bit of a struggle. But I think it's so worth it to have that real sound in the end.
Yeah, that's true.
From a scene.
I never thought about that, but now that you say it, I also had like things where I had to record something, and then I would walk in, and then they were like, "Okay, so now let's record the footsteps again," and it's like, okay, so I'm like, sure.
Everyone is silent.
And then they're like, "Can you walk a bit more like natural?" I'm like, "I don't know. How do you walk right?" You know what I mean? But it's interesting because another project that you're passionate about is touring, which you can maybe talk a little bit more about. But also, it's the same thing, like visuals coming together with sound and music. Seems to be something that is kind of like a reoccurring theme in your work. Tell me more about it, and also what made you join forces with your partners for that project.
Yeah, so touring is like my recent project, which I'm doing with two music producers from Munich. I think what we're trying there is that we are this unique fusion, two music producers and a film director, and we're trying to create a new live experience. So we had our premiere, our first show in Munich in the Deutsche Museum this summer. And basically what we are trying to do is that we talk to each other and we were like, can we make it possible that the music create the visuals and that the visuals create the music? It's not like, okay, there is a concert, there is a musician, and there is a visual guy who's trying to adapt the visuals to the beat, but that it's like really, really
equal.
In sync and equal, and that it's not only about the music or only about the film, that it's about both. And I think that's so much fun because it's like very experimental. And especially for me as a film director, I have like a completely different view on that than the two music producers, right? So what we tried and what we are still trying to do is that we're working a lot with analog synthesizers on the music side. And we're working with a software called Touch Designer, which is specialized in doing animation, but live.
Oh, okay.
So whatever you can imagine to animate, this software can do, but it does it live. You don't need to render stuff. You don't need to export stuff. So it does it live, which is exactly what we need to have the ability that the music basically influences the visuals and the visuals influences the music. And we had our premiere in Munich at the Planetarium. So it was like a 360 dome show with also 360 sound, and people weren't sitting or standing, they were lying on the floor and watching the ceiling, and it was like a 1 hour show, and we really took like people on a journey. It was amazing also for me to see the direct impact of what...
I was about to ask that. I was about to ask because as a director, you don't always immediately get like this feedback and like this immediate reaction from people. And that feels nice, I can imagine,
it's
or
so nice.
Depending on the reaction.
Yeah, it's so nice. I mean, the reaction was also great. So
That's good.
That was so nice. But normally, like you said, when I publish a film, maybe you see some comments on social media.
And maybe you have a premiere and then you see people, but
right. But still, then it's like
it's different.
It's very different. And when we did the live show with Touring, it was so nice for me to see. First of all, the people had to stay for 1 hour, which is great for me as a film director, because nowadays people just skip away after like 20 seconds.
Yeah, short attention span, right?
Very short attention span. So it was so nice for me to have like the ability to know, okay, I can direct this space for the next hour and people have to stay.
Yeah.
And that way you can really tease them and you can really make them want that the beat is dropping and that some visuals are coming up, right? If you would do that in social media, if you would put our show to social media, it would be like the least successful show because nothing is happening in the first 2 minutes.
But I also don't think, I think it's really interesting because a lot of people focus on creating for online platforms or creating for these spaces, and it influences the way you create and think, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to say this is intentionally for a real life space with people there, and then we can play a lot more with these types of things without being without the fear of thinking, oh, someone's gonna click further.
Yeah.
So yeah, beautifully said. I wanted to ask, because you told me that, which I find funny because a museum is like a specific environment with a lot of people in a city usually. And then you told me that you usually also go to nature to find inspiration, and probably also to create with the other 2 guys that are part of this project. Why is it important for maybe the 3 of you, or I guess you can just speak for yourself, to do that rather than sitting in a studio, for instance?
So, for example, the 2 other music producers, they are used to produce in their music studio, which is in Munich, and sometimes I'm joining them in their studio environment. But I think what's really interesting is when you get people out of their safe space, especially when it comes to creative work, because then people actually get new inspiration. Then people change things up, and then people don't do things like they have done it for the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years, right? So with Touring as well, we're trying to move the studio environment when we create new music. We're trying to move the studio environment away from where they're used to create music, which sometimes is also my cabin in Austria. But nowadays you don't really need like a lot. So you can just bring a little and then you can create. And you can still fine tune later in the studio. But this first spark, this first idea, I think that's what is so important, and that's what you get when you're out of your comfort zone and out of your routine.
Yeah, and it also makes me wonder, like, hearing you talk about all of these things makes me think, like, and that's something I ask anyone that is passionate about their work or whatever it is that they do in, like, a creative environment or sector, is do you think that you pay more attention to certain things based on your background? So, for instance, if you go to the movies, like, are you the type of person that is like, the sound and like these types of things? Like, what is it that you pay attention to, for instance, when it comes to sound, when watching other people's work?
I think I'm very sensitive to sound, very sensitive. Like when the sound is off, like it doesn't have to be off in terms of it's not in sync, but also off in terms of there's this one high pitch sound, or there is this one sound which I can't really describe it. That's also a funny part, that working with 2 music producers, I'm having a hard time describing music in words.
And also saying why you maybe don't like something.
Right. So often they ask me, why don't you like that? And I was like, I can't tell you specifically which part I don't like. I can just describe the feeling I have. Yeah. And I hope that you can translate that into your world. So, but coming back to your question.
Yeah. No, I love it. Conversation is always like table tennis.
No, I'm very sensitive to sound. And I think sometimes when the sound is off, I'm getting thrown out. If it's a film or if it's a live show or a musical or whatever.
Yeah. And what kind of like does the opposite to you? What is something that you're like, oh, wow, this really got to me, or I really loved it? Like, what is something that you look for in a positive way, maybe?
I love organic sound. So everything which is organic, which comes from nature or from real life, I love that. And I think sometimes it's, like I said, for me, it's hard to tell you why or what it is which I like. But I think the word organic pretty much sums it up, that it needs, inside me, there needs to be some kind of reaction, some kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And then I'm happy. The feeling can also be negative, or like you can also be...
You want to be moved a little bit.
You want to be moved,
Yeah.
or I want to be moved. You can get melancholy, but still then it's nice, but I need to be moved. And sometimes when I'm not moved, I think then it's not working for me.
Yeah. Are you the type of person that can't listen to a song without watching a music video, for instance?
No. What I love to do, I also did it this morning when I was at the airport. I put on my noise cancellation headphones and I'm walking through the airport and I'm observing different scenes. Like, for example, there is an old couple walking in front of me holding
like a
hands.
movie.
And then I choose the soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
And I have the soundtrack on and I watch it. For me, it feels like I'm in the movie and I can control the vibe and I can change the music and it becomes like this thriller, right? So I really often sometimes do this game. It's super fun.
That's super fun. It's funny. I don't do this like exactly like you described it, but I also do it that I'm like, when I listen to a certain sound and I look around and I'm like, whoa, this could be like such a funny movie scene or something like that. But that you intentionally change the sound according to, that's fun. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah,
I think that's
like
a fun game. That's like a different way of like, you know, when people say something and then someone else always tries to like sing a song about the quote that they just said. I think this is this in a different way.
Yeah. True.
When I asked you in what phase you are in right now, you were laughing and you said that like about a year ago, you did like a 10-day meditation retreat where someone asked you a similar question. And you told me now that it was a 10-day meditation retreat where you weren't allowed to talk, right?
Yeah, it was like a 10-day silent meditation vipassana retreat.
Exactly. And you mentioned something about... Also, sorry, I want to go back to that and be like, what does the absence of sound also do to you, especially when you don't talk? Because I feel like our voice is also like a repetitive sound that does something to us internally in a way, right?
Yeah.
What did that do to you? I'm very curious because I'm also imagining that they're not allowed to listen to anything, right? Music and something.
No, you're not allowed to listen. You were not allowed to read or write. There were no images on the walls. It's just you and your thoughts for 10 days. It's very, for me, I mean, everyone has a different experience doing those vipassana retreats or those meditation silent retreats. But what I realized in terms of sound is when I came back or when I came out after those 10 days, I went back to Frankfurt where I was living back then. And it was the 27th or 28th of December. So it was right between Christmas and New Year's. And I was taking a stroll through my neighborhood, which is like downtown of Frankfurt. And I heard everything, literally everything. I heard like the tree, like the wind blowing through the tree. I heard the birds. I heard like all those small details which you normally don't hear when you're used to everything. Yeah. And I remember back in that day, I went for dinner with a friend and we went into an Italian place. And after 10 minutes, I said, like, I can't be here. It's so loud. So I think the sensitivity of what you hear is getting lower and lower. Like you hear more stuff. At some point, after 10 days, I heard the blood going through my veins. Like
Really?
It's crazy.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, when there's no sound,
yeah,
you sometimes
your
sensitivity gets higher and higher.
Yeah, that's wow. I don't know if you're selling it to me or not.
Yeah, I'm not trying to sell it to you because I think for me, I had the best and the worst days of my life during those 10 days.
It's confrontational also.
It's so confrontational. So it's, everyone has to decide for themselves if they want to do it.
I know someone that did it for like a day. And I've been trying for a year to be like, oh, I'm going to do one day, for like 24 hours where I'm not going to speak. And I just always tell myself like, there's no day where it's possible. I have to work, I have to do this. But I feel like I still...
But it's also your work that you speak, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's kind of hard.
Well, I guess. But it's more listening than speaking, actually.
True.
You were saying that movement is quite important to you. And I was wondering if there are also specific sounds or music that make you move, because also often like a job in the film industry can be very static in a way that you are behind the camera a lot or editing a lot. Like, are there things that make you move or inspire you to move?
Yeah, of course. I mean, sometimes on set I work with this technique that I give my cameraman headphones and he's filming this scene. It could be a love scene or it could be a more like action, dynamic scene. And I put a soundtrack on his headphones and basically then I try to direct the camera work through the soundtrack.
Wow.
So, for example, we had a love scene and the love scene, normally you would be very gentle and very intimate and very calm, but I wanted to have more like a dynamic feel to it. So I gave him more like I don't really know what exactly I gave him, but it was more like a rock, high tempo track. And I put it on his headphones and it was so nice to see how he basically reacted to the soundtrack and how he filmed the whole scene in a different way.
Yeah, a different rhythm.
Completely different rhythm. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
100%.
Sometimes
100%.
Music translate into movement, and this movement is then the movement of the camera on set.
Yeah, and then when you from there go into like the editing process, what do you pay attention to when it comes to sound when like working further on the movie, on any project?
So normally I create a playlist. That's the beginning of every project for me. Beforehand, when I write the script, I sometimes already have a soundtrack in mind, or I listen to music while I write it, or I read it through and I try different tracks. But then when it comes to the edit process, to the whole post-production, I normally by then have like a playlist with different songs. And then what I try to do is that I just grab some of the scenes, just randomly put them a little together like a mood board, and then I play those different soundtracks, and I try to figure out, and that's what I said earlier, I'm really bad with explaining why this track works or why this track is not working. For me, it's always about if I feel something or not. And that's why I think before I brief the composers or the people who do the soundtrack, I always have to do some homework for myself. That's why I have this playlist. I go through different genres, I go through different tempis, and I try different tracks, and I see what works for me and what doesn't. And then I go back to them and I just play them, the sounds which work for me. That's my way of communicating in this music world, because I'm really bad with telling them, oh, I want a piano. I'm like, well, I don't know if I want a piano. For me, it's not about the piano. For me, it's about the feeling of this. So that's kind of my way how I approach it.
Yeah, so that's your way of like kind of communicating a feeling almost in a way.
Yeah.
It's like by finding sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sound transports so many emotions, and film, same. For me, filmmaking is bringing someone in and taking them on an emotional journey. And I think for me, everyone has their different way of communicating and working with each other or telling what you want. But for me, also with my crew, if it's with the post-production, with the edit, or with the sound guys, for me, I always send mood tracks. I always tell them, look, this is the feeling I want. I describe them. If it's 6 a.m. and you're in the techno club and you're having this high, I want this energy. So that's the way how I work. I'm not going to be that guy who's telling the composer, oh, I want a D moll played on the piano, and that's not me. I can't do that. So I'm always trying to express myself through emotions and feelings. And that's something you can always find in music.
Yeah, and do you also find that in a way in certain key moments within your work in like the absence of sound and silence, because you mentioned the silent retreat. Sorry for going back to it again, but I thought it was really interesting as well to hear how you could hear your, like even your blood, like pumping through your body. How did that influence your work after you went to the retreat?
After I went to the retreat, actually, I did Hands of Sicily, which is. It's interesting that you ask that. I've never thought about it if this retreat changed my work, but maybe it did, because Hands of Sicily was very intimate, and you can really hear like those ASMR sounds, right? Like as if the mic is like really close to what's happening. So I think that's what I loved about the retreat in the end, that you can hear that the sensitivity of your own ears is like so high that you can hear so many different things. And that's what I loved about Hands of Sicily as well, that in the soundtrack you can hear, like I said, I always bring up this example of the old lady rubbing the cheese, but it's like, for me, this is a perfect example of how you feel sound. You can actually, you are in the moment. So maybe the silent retreat changed that in terms of that I'm trying to be more closer with the sound to what happens.
It's maybe also about the simplicity of things sometimes, that can be quite grand and like achieve something way bigger than like being super loud with everything, right? Lovely, really interesting. Thank you so much for talking to me, sharing your thoughts and insights. It was beautiful.
Thank you.